You have spent your entire life searching for something you have never once been without. Let that sentence settle for a moment before we go any further tonight. You have spent your entire life searching for something you have never once been without. This is not a riddle, and it is not a trick of language designed to confuse you. It is, in fact, the single most important observation the Buddha ever made about the human condition. And if you can allow yourself to sit with it honestly for the next hour, you may find that something inside you begins to loosen in a way that no amount of striving, no amount of achievement, and no amount of acquiring has ever quite managed to accomplish. Find a position now where your body can be still without being rigid, where your spine can rise with a quiet dignity, but your shoulders can remain soft, unclenched, free of the habitual bracing you carry through so many of your waking hours, without ever noticing you are doing it. If it is safe to close your eyes, close them. If it is not, let your gaze rest gently on some point in front of you, unfocused, undemanding. Take a breath now, slower than your ordinary breath, and let it fill you from the low belly upward. And when you release it, let it go completely, all the way to the bottom, as though you were setting down something you have been holding without knowing you were holding it. Do this 2 more times. There is no way to do this incorrectly. There is nothing here that requires your effort beyond the simple willingness to be present for what is already happening in your own body. Tonight we are not going to tell a story about a particular man or a particular woman walking through a particular set of circumstances. Tonight I want to speak to you directly, the way a teacher speaks to a student who has been sitting with a question for a very long time and is finally ready to hear the answer, not as an abstraction, but as something that can be verified in your own experience this very evening. We are going to look together at the nature of your own mind, the nature of what the tradition calls karma, the nature of what the tradition calls emptiness, and the nature of the one thing you have been searching for across every year of your life, without ever once losing possession of it. This is not philosophy for its own sake. This is the most practical teaching that exists because it addresses the actual mechanism by which suffering arises and the actual mechanism by which it can end, and it does not require you to believe anything on faith. It only requires you to look. Let us begin with the mind itself, because everything else we will discuss tonight depends on understanding what the mind actually is and how it actually operates, as distinct from how we have been assuming it operates for most of our lives, without ever examining the assumption. Most people move through their entire existence believing, without ever consciously deciding to believe it, that there is a fixed, solid, continuous self sitting somewhere behind the eyes, watching experience unfold, like a person seated in a theater watching a film play out on a screen in front of them. This self, we assume, is the same self that existed in childhood, the same self that will exist in old age, the same self that has opinions and preferences and a personality that remains essentially stable across the decades, weathering circumstances but never fundamentally altered by them. This assumption feels so obvious, so self-evident, that most people never think to question it at all. And yet this very assumption, according to the Buddha's most penetrating insight, is the single root from which almost all human suffering ultimately grows. Sit with your own experience for a moment and ask yourself honestly whether this fixed self can actually be located anywhere. Where is it? Is it the body? The body you have now is not the body you had as a child, has replaced nearly every cell it once contained, will continue changing in ways beyond your control until the day it ceases entirely. Is it your thoughts? Your thoughts arise unbidden, one after another, in a stream you did not initiate and cannot fully control. Thoughts about the past mixing with thoughts about the future. Thoughts about fear mixing with thoughts about hope. None of them remaining fixed for more than a few moments before dissolving into the next. Is it your emotions? Your emotions rise and fall like weather. Anger giving way to tenderness. Grief giving way eventually to something quieter. None of these states permanent. None of them the whole of you, each one arising from conditions and passing away when those conditions change. Is it your memories? Your memories are themselves reconstructed each time you access them, colored by your current mood, subtly altered by every retelling, no more fixed or permanent than anything else we have examined. What the Buddha discovered, sitting beneath that tree so many centuries ago, was that when you look for this solid, continuous self with genuine rigor, you cannot actually find it anywhere. You find instead a constantly shifting stream of physical sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, arising together in each moment, dependent on conditions, absent any fixed core that could be called a permanent self. This is what the tradition means by anatta, often translated as non-self. And I want to be very careful here, because this teaching is easily misunderstood in a way that causes people needless alarm. The teaching of non-self does not mean you do not exist. You are clearly, undeniably having an experience right now, listening to these words, feeling the weight of your body, breathing in and breathing out. What the teaching points to is something more subtle and, once understood, considerably more liberating than mere negation. It points to the fact that what you are is not a fixed thing, but a process, not a noun, but a verb, not a solid object moving through time unchanged, but a living, breathing, ever-changing flow of experience that has never once been the same from one moment to the next. This matters enormously for the question of suffering, because so much of what causes us pain arises directly from our insistence on defending, protecting, and solidifying a self that was never as fixed as we believed it to be in the first place. Think of how much energy you have spent throughout your life defending your reputation, your opinions, your sense of being right in an argument, your identity as a certain kind of person with certain fixed characteristics. Think of how threatened you feel when someone challenges an idea you hold about yourself, how disproportionate your reaction sometimes becomes when your self-image feels under attack. All of this energy, all of this defensive exhaustion, is spent protecting something that upon direct examination was never as solid as you assumed. This is not a reason for despair. It is, in fact, extraordinarily good news, because it means the rigid walls you have spent your life building and defending were never load-bearing walls in the first place. They can be softened. They can be released. And what remains when they are released is not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, but a spacious, flexible, deeply alive quality of being that is far more resilient than any fixed identity could ever hope to be. Now let us turn to karma, because this word has been so thoroughly misunderstood in popular culture that it has come to mean almost the opposite of what the Buddha originally taught. Many people use the word karma to mean a kind of cosmic justice system, an external force that punishes bad behavior and rewards good behavior across lifetimes, almost like a ledger kept by some invisible accountant in the sky. This is not what the Buddha taught, and understanding the actual teaching will change entirely how you relate to your own choices and your own suffering. Karma simply means action, and more precisely, it means the intention behind action. The Buddha taught that it is intention, not the external form of an act, that determines its karmic weight. Two people can perform the exact same external action, and the karmic consequence for each of them will differ entirely depending on the quality of mind, the intention from which that action arose. What this means practically is that karma is not something that happens to you from the outside. Karma is the direct, observable, immediate relationship between the state of your own mind and the quality of experience that state of mind produces, both for yourself and for those around you. When you act from a mind gripped by anger, hatred, or fear, you create conditions within your own being and within your relationships that tend to produce further suffering, regardless of whether anyone ever punishes you for the action itself. When you act from a mind grounded in clarity, kindness, and genuine care, you create conditions that tend to produce ease, connection, and peace, again, regardless of any external reward. This is not mystical. You can verify this in your own life this very week. Notice how differently you feel and how differently others respond to you when you move through a conversation from a place of genuine goodwill, compared to when you move through the same kind of conversation from a place of defensive irritation. The external circumstances may be identical. The internal and relational consequences are entirely different. This is karma, functioning exactly as the Buddha described it, not as cosmic punishment, but as the precise and observable relationship between mind and consequence. This teaching becomes especially important when we consider the suffering so many people carry around old mistakes, old failures, old moments of unskillful behavior they cannot forgive themselves for having committed. If karma were a fixed cosmic ledger recording permanent debts, this suffering might make a certain grim sense, an endless sentence with no possibility of parole. But because karma is actually about the ongoing relationship between present intention and present consequence, it means that every single moment offers you a genuine opportunity to create new karma, to plant new seeds, regardless of what seeds were planted in moments now long past. The person who spent decades acting from anger and fear is not condemned to an eternity of the same. In this very moment, with this very breath, a different intention can arise. And that different intention begins, immediately and without delay, to shift the conditions of that person's life. This is an extraordinarily hopeful teaching, properly understood, because it means the past, however painful, however filled with actions you now regret, does not have final authority over what is possible in your life from this moment forward. Let us go deeper still into the mechanism by which suffering actually arises, because the Buddha did not stop at describing suffering in general terms. He offered what is sometimes called the teaching of dependent origination, a description of the precise chain of conditions through which a single moment of contact with the world becomes, through a series of entirely natural and observable steps, a full-blown experience of craving, clinging, and suffering. This teaching can sound abstract when described in its traditional formulation, but I want to walk you through it slowly tonight, in language drawn from your own ordinary experience. Because once you see this chain clearly, you gain the capacity to interrupt it at any point along its length, which is one of the most powerful tools available to any human being seeking genuine freedom from unnecessary suffering. It begins with contact. Your eye meets a sight. Your ear meets a sound. Your mind meets a thought or a memory. This contact itself is neutral, simply the meeting of a sense organ with its corresponding object, something that happens thousands of times each day without your conscious deliberation. Immediately following contact, a feeling tone arises, and this feeling tone is one of only 3 possibilities: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. You hear a piece of music you love, and a pleasant feeling tone arises. You hear a colleague criticize your work, and an unpleasant feeling tone arises. You hear the hum of a refrigerator in another room, and a neutral feeling tone arises, one so unremarkable you likely do not even register it consciously. This feeling tone, again, is entirely natural, unavoidable, and not itself the source of suffering. Suffering begins to enter the picture at the very next link in the chain, the moment when craving arises in response to the feeling tone. If the feeling tone is pleasant, craving arises as a wanting for more, a grasping after the continuation or repetition of the pleasant experience. If the feeling tone is unpleasant, craving arises as a wanting for less, an aversion, a pushing away, a desire for the unpleasant experience to end as quickly as possible. This is the precise moment where the untrained mind begins to add something extra to raw experience, an overlay of wanting that was not present in the simple contact and feeling tone themselves. And once craving has arisen, it very quickly gives rise to clinging, a tightening of the grip, a mental grasping that insists the pleasant experience must continue, or the unpleasant experience must be eliminated. And it is this clinging, this insistence that reality conform to our preference, that produces the tension, the contraction, the suffering we experience in our bodies and our minds. Notice how much of your own daily experience follows exactly this pattern. A pleasant comment from a friend arises, and immediately you find yourself wanting more approval, more validation, becoming subtly anxious about whether the good feeling will last. An unpleasant memory surfaces, and immediately you find yourself pushing it away, distracting yourself, avoiding it, which paradoxically often gives it more power over you rather than less. None of this is a moral failing. This is simply how the untrained mind operates, moment after moment, largely below the threshold of conscious awareness. And it operates this way for every single human being who has not yet learned to observe the process directly. The extraordinary gift of contemplative practice is that it allows you to slow this entire chain down enough to actually witness it happening. And the moment you can witness craving arising as craving, rather than being swept away by it unconsciously, you have already interrupted the automatic chain that would otherwise lead directly into clinging and suffering. This is the actual mechanism behind everything we have discussed in previous conversations about acceptance, about letting go, about ceasing to fight against reality. It is not a vague spiritual platitude to say these things. It is a precise description of interrupting the chain of dependent origination at the exact link where craving would otherwise arise automatically in response to a feeling tone. When an unpleasant feeling tone arises and you meet it with awareness rather than immediate aversion, you create a small gap, a pause, a moment of spaciousness between the raw experience and your habitual reaction to it. Within that gap lies your entire freedom. This is not a large gap at first. It may last only a fraction of a second when you first begin practicing this kind of attention. But that fraction of a second, cultivated patiently over months and years of practice, becomes the foundation upon which an entirely different relationship with your own experience is built. Let us now speak of emptiness, a word that frightens many people when they first encounter it in a spiritual context, because it sounds bleak, sounds like a description of meaninglessness or nihilism, sounds like the opposite of everything a person seeking comfort and healing would want to hear. I want to reassure you tonight that emptiness, properly understood within this tradition, is not bleak at all. It is, in fact, one of the most liberating and quietly joyful teachings the Buddha ever offered, and it flows directly from everything we have already discussed about the absence of a fixed, permanent self and the constantly arising, dependently originated nature of all experience. Emptiness in this teaching does not mean that nothing exists. It means that nothing exists independently, separately, in isolation from everything else. Consider a single wave on the surface of the ocean. The wave certainly exists, is clearly visible, has a distinct shape and movement that you can point to and describe. And yet the wave has no independent existence apart from the ocean itself. It is not a separate thing that has been added to the water. It is the water, temporarily taking a particular shape under particular conditions, wind and current and depth all conspiring together to produce this momentary form we call a wave, a form that will dissolve back into the larger body of water the moment those conditions shift even slightly. The wave is empty of independent, separate existence, and yet the wave is also undeniably, fully and completely present while it exists. This is precisely how the Buddha taught us to understand ourselves, and indeed all phenomena. You exist, clearly and undeniably, exactly as the wave exists. And yet you exist only as an expression of countless conditions coming together in this moment. The food that has nourished your body, the air that fills your lungs right now, the language you learned from people who raised you, the culture that shaped your thoughts, the ancestors whose choices made centuries before your birth rippled forward through time to produce the exact circumstances of your existence today. You are not separate from any of this. You are, like the wave, a temporary and beautiful expression of a vast web of interdependent conditions, arising for a time, taking this particular shape we call your life, and eventually dissolving back into the larger flow from which you arose. Why does this matter for healing, for suffering, for the particular ache so many people carry of feeling fundamentally alone, isolated, cut off from genuine connection with others? It matters because so much human suffering stems from the illusion of separateness, the belief that you are a solid, isolated self, standing apart from everyone and everything else, forced to defend your boundaries, compete for scarce resources, protect your interests against a world of other separate selves who may threaten you at any moment. This illusion of separateness generates fear, generates loneliness, generates the exhausting sense that you must constantly guard yourself against a fundamentally hostile or indifferent universe. But when you begin to genuinely feel, not merely intellectually understand, but actually feel in your own body the truth of your interdependence with everything around you, something in that isolated fear begins to soften. You realize you were never actually as alone as you believed. The air you breathe was breathed by countless others before you, and will be breathed by countless others after you. The very atoms composing your body were forged in the heart of stars that exploded billions of years before you were ever born. You are not separate from this vast, ancient, ongoing process. You are one of its countless current expressions, briefly taking this particular shape, connected by the deepest possible bonds to everything that has ever existed and everything that ever will. This brings us finally to the question I asked you to sit with at the very beginning of our time together tonight. You have spent your entire life searching for something you have never once been without. What is this thing? It is awareness itself, the simple, undeniable capacity to know, to be conscious, to experience whatever arises, which has been present in every single moment of your existence, without a single exception. Think back across your entire life, every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every failure, every relationship that flourished and every relationship that ended in heartbreak. Through every single one of these vastly different experiences, something remained constant. Something was present to witness all of it. Something never once went missing, even for an instant. This awareness did not arrive with your achievements and did not depart with your failures. It was not more present during your happiest years and less present during your most difficult ones. It has simply, quietly, undramatically been here the entire time. The one constant thread running through the endlessly shifting fabric of your changing experience. This awareness is what the tradition sometimes calls Buddha nature, the fundamental capacity for clarity and presence that exists fully and completely in every single human being, regardless of their circumstances, their past mistakes, their current struggles, or their level of spiritual attainment. It is not something you need to acquire through years of practice, because you already possess it completely, right now, in this very moment, as you listen to these words. What practice actually does, what meditation actually accomplishes, is not the creation of this awareness, but the gradual removal of the habitual patterns, the grasping, the aversion, the false belief in a solid, separate self, that obscure your direct recognition of what has been present all along. This is why the Buddha so often used the metaphor of clouds obscuring the sun. The sun does not need to be created or improved. It is already blazing, already complete, already present behind every cloud that ever passes across the sky. The spiritual work is simply the patient, gentle clearing away of the clouds, revealing what was never actually absent in the first place. Sit with this for a moment now. Let your attention rest, not on any particular thought or sensation, but on the simple fact of awareness itself, the knowing quality that is aware of whatever is happening right now, whether that is the sound of your own breathing, the sensation of your body against whatever supports it, or the quiet hum of thoughts passing through your mind. You do not need to change anything about this awareness. You do not need to make it calmer or clearer or more spiritual. You only need to notice that it is already here, already complete, already exactly what you have been searching for across every year of striving and seeking that led you to this particular hour, listening to these particular words. This recognition, however brief, however subtle, is the beginning of everything the entire contemplative tradition has ever pointed toward. Not a destination to be reached after years of difficult practice, but a homecoming available in this very instant, requiring nothing more than the willingness to stop looking outward for a moment and simply notice what has been here all along. I want to speak now about how this understanding transforms the specific griefs and struggles that likely brought you to listen to teachings like this one in the first place, because none of what we have discussed tonight is meant to remain abstract or merely philosophical. Consider the grief of loss, the particular ache of losing someone you loved deeply, whether through death or through the ending of a relationship that once meant everything to you. When we understand the teaching of interdependence, we begin to see that the person we lost was never, even during their lifetime, a truly separate entity, existing independently of everything around them. They were, like the wave, a temporary and beautiful expression of countless conditions, and while the particular form of their presence in your life has indeed changed, The deeper reality of interconnection that made your relationship possible in the first place has not disappeared. The love you shared was real, remains real in the sense that it shaped you permanently, continues to influence how you move through the world, continues to exist as a formative force within the ongoing, interdependent unfolding of your own life. This does not eliminate grief, and it should not, because grief is the natural and appropriate response to genuine loss. But it can soften the particular quality of grief that insists the person or the relationship has vanished entirely into nothingness, replacing it with a quieter, more spacious understanding that connection, once genuinely formed, continues rippling forward through the vast web of interdependence in ways we cannot always trace, but can trust are real. Consider also the particular suffering of regret, the weight so many people carry around decisions made years or even decades ago, choices they now wish they had made differently, words spoken in anger that can never be unspoken, opportunities missed that can never be recovered. When we understand karma correctly, not as a fixed cosmic ledger of permanent debt, but as the ongoing relationship between present intention and present consequence, we begin to see that the person who made those regretted choices was operating from a particular configuration of conditions, a particular level of understanding, a particular set of circumstances that existed at that time and does not exist in exactly the same way now. You are not the same person who made that choice years ago, not in the sense of denying responsibility, but in the more literal sense we discussed earlier tonight regarding the absence of a fixed, permanent self. The stream of your experience has continued flowing since that moment, has been shaped by everything that has happened since, including, quite possibly, genuine learning and growth that emerged directly from the pain of that very regret. This does not mean the past mistake did not matter or did not cause real harm. It means the person capable of causing that harm and the person listening to these words right now are connected but not identical, and the capacity for a different intention, a different quality of action, exists fully and completely in this present moment, regardless of what came before. Consider finally the particular loneliness that seems to afflict so many people in this modern era, despite unprecedented levels of technological connection, despite more ways than ever before to communicate across vast distances instantaneously. This loneliness often stems precisely from the illusion of separateness we discussed earlier, the felt sense of being a solitary self navigating a world of other solitary selves, each of us fundamentally isolated within the confines of our own private experience. The teaching of interdependence offers a different possibility, not as a mere intellectual comfort, but as a description of how things actually are. You are, in this very moment, connected to every person who has ever lived through the shared inheritance of language, culture, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who struggled with the same fundamental questions you struggle with now. You are connected to every person currently alive through the shared conditions of being human, of breathing the same air, of facing the same fundamental truths of impermanence and change that govern every single life without exception. This connection does not eliminate the very real and legitimate need for close, intimate human relationships, and it is not meant to substitute for reaching out to others when you need support. But it can offer, in moments when such reaching out feels impossible, or when circumstances have left you genuinely isolated, a felt sense that you were never as alone as the illusion of separateness led you to believe. As we move toward the conclusion of our time together this evening, I want to offer you a specific practice you can carry forward from tonight, something simple enough to remember even in the midst of a difficult day, yet profound enough to gradually reshape your entire relationship with your own experience over time. The practice is simply this. Throughout tomorrow, whenever you notice a strong reaction arising within you, whether pleasant or unpleasant, whether excitement or irritation or anxiety or joy, pause for just a single breath and ask yourself silently, what is aware of this? Not what is causing this, not what should I do about this, but simply, what is aware of this? This question gently redirects your attention from the content of the experience, which is constantly changing and often quite compelling in its intensity, toward the awareness itself, which has remained constant and unchanging throughout every experience you have ever had. You do not need to answer this question with words. You only need to notice, briefly, the quality of awareness that is present. The same awareness that was present in your childhood. The same awareness that will be present in your final moments. The same awareness that has never once, in your entire life, gone missing even for a single instant. This small practice, repeated patiently across days and weeks and months, begins to loosen the grip of the illusion that you are your thoughts, that you are your emotions, that you are the endlessly changing content of your experience, rather than the spacious awareness in which all of that content arises and passes away. And as this grip loosens, something remarkable begins to happen. The intensity of your reactions does not necessarily disappear, but your relationship to that intensity changes fundamentally. You begin to experience even difficult emotions as weather moving through a vast and unchanging sky, rather than as floods threatening to drown you entirely. You begin to hold your own mistakes, your own regrets, your own fears about the future, with a gentler, more spacious quality of attention, recognizing them as temporary formations arising from temporary conditions, rather than permanent verdicts on your fundamental worth as a human being. I want to close tonight by returning to where we began, to that single sentence I asked you to sit with at the very start of our time together. You have spent your entire life searching for something you have never once been without. The peace you have been seeking through achievement, through relationships, through the endless pursuit of circumstances finally arranging themselves correctly, has never actually been absent from your life, not for a single moment. It has been here, quietly, patiently, underneath every experience you have ever had, waiting not to be earned or achieved, but simply to be recognized. This recognition does not require you to become a different person, does not require you to eliminate every difficult emotion or resolve every unresolved circumstance in your life. It requires only the willingness, cultivated patiently over time, to notice what has been present all along, underneath the endless activity of thought and emotion and circumstance, the simple, spacious, unchanging awareness that has carried you through every single moment of your existence, and continues right now to carry you through this one. Rest in this awareness for a few final breaths before we close. Let your body remain soft, your breath remain natural, your attention resting gently on the simple fact of being aware, without needing to grasp at anything or push anything away. Whatever you carried into this hour, whatever grief or regret or loneliness or fear brought you to listen tonight, know that it has been held throughout this entire time by an awareness that has never once been diminished by any difficulty you have ever faced. This awareness does not judge what arises within it. It simply knows, simply witnesses, simply remains present, complete and whole, regardless of the weather passing through the sky of your experience. May you carry a small measure of this recognition forward into the days ahead. May you meet your own mistakes with the understanding that karma is not punishment, but simply the ongoing invitation to plant new seeds in this present moment. May you meet your own grief with the understanding that nothing genuinely connected through love ever truly disappears into separateness. May you meet your own loneliness with the quiet recognition that you have never been as isolated as the illusion of a solid, separate self once led you to believe. And may you meet this very moment, exactly as it is, with the awareness that has been your constant and faithful companion through every single experience of your entire life, asking nothing of you except your willingness to notice that it has been here all along. Thank you for spending this hour in genuine reflection alongside these ancient teachings. If something within these words found its way into your own heart tonight, carry it gently into your day tomorrow, returning to it whenever you have a quiet moment to simply notice the awareness that is always, endlessly, patiently present beneath every changing circumstance of your life. Rest now. You have been searching for peace across every year of your life, and it has been here the entire time, waiting quietly for you to finally stop looking elsewhere and simply notice what you have never once been without. There is one further dimension of this teaching I want to offer you tonight, because it addresses something that arises naturally once a person begins to genuinely absorb what we have discussed so far. A kind of practical question that tends to surface almost immediately. If there is no fixed self, if karma is simply the ongoing relationship between intention and consequence, if all phenomena are empty of independent existence and interdependent with everything else, then what, precisely, is the relationship between this understanding and the actual conduct of an ordinary human life? Does this teaching mean that choices no longer matter, that discipline no longer matters, that the careful cultivation of a good and meaningful life becomes somehow irrelevant once we recognize the empty, interdependent, ever-changing nature of existence? This is a question that has occupied serious practitioners for as long as these teachings have existed, and the answer the tradition offers is both subtle and immensely practical. The absence of a fixed self does not mean the absence of continuity, and this distinction matters enormously. Think again of the wave on the ocean. Though the wave has no independent existence apart from the water, this does not mean the wave behaves randomly, without pattern, without any coherent relationship between one moment and the next. The wave that exists this second is directly, causally connected to the wave that existed a moment before, shaped by the same wind, the same current, the same underlying conditions that produced its particular form. In exactly this way, the stream of your own experience, though empty of any fixed, unchanging core, is not chaotic or disconnected. Each moment of this stream arises in direct dependence upon the moment before it, shaped by the intentions you cultivated, the habits you reinforced, the choices you made, whether skillful or unskillful. This is precisely why karma remains meaningful, even in the absence of a permanent self. The continuity of karma does not require a fixed soul carrying a ledger from one moment to the next. It requires only the same kind of dependent causal continuity that allows a river to remain recognizably itself while never containing the same water twice. This means that your daily choices, your daily practice, the daily cultivation of kindness over cruelty, of patience over reactivity, of generosity over grasping, matters enormously. Precisely because these choices are what shape the ongoing character of the stream that constitutes your experience. You are not building a fixed monument to a permanent self when you practice virtue. You are, moment by moment, shaping the conditions from which the next moment of your experience will arise. And this shaping has consequences that ripple forward through your life and through the lives of everyone you touch, in ways both visible and invisible, immediate and delayed. This is why the Buddha spent so much of his teaching career offering extremely practical guidance about ethical conduct, about the cultivation of specific wholesome mental qualities, about the abandonment of specific unwholesome ones, even while simultaneously teaching the most radical philosophical insights about the empty, selfless, interdependent nature of all phenomena. These two dimensions of the teaching, the philosophical and the ethical, are not in tension with one another. They support each other completely because it is precisely the clear seeing of how suffering actually arises through craving and clinging in a mind mistakenly convinced of its own fixed separateness that makes genuinely compassionate and skillful action not merely a moral obligation imposed from outside, but a natural expression of wisdom itself. Let us bring this teaching even closer to the actual texture of your daily life by considering how these principles operate within the realm of human relationships. Because this is where so much of our suffering and so much of our potential for genuine healing actually takes place. Consider a relationship in your own life that has become difficult, strained, perhaps even painful, whether with a spouse, a sibling, a parent, or a close friend. The untrained mind approaches such a relationship from the assumption of two fixed, separate selves in conflict, each with their own solid, unchanging position, each defending their own solid, unchanging interests against the other. From this assumption, conflict becomes almost a battle between two fortresses, each side convinced of its own rightness, each side perceiving the other as a fixed obstacle standing in the way of its own needs and desires. This framework, rooted in the illusion of separate solid selfhood, tends to entrench conflict rather than resolve it, because it leaves no room for the kind of fluid, evolving understanding that genuine healing requires. Now consider the same relationship viewed through the lens of interdependence and non-self that we have been exploring tonight. The person who frustrates you, who disappoints you, who seems to stand as an obstacle to your own happiness, is not a fixed, solid entity acting from some permanent, unchanging essence of cruelty or selfishness. They are, exactly as you are, a constantly shifting stream of conditions shaped by their own history, their own wounds, their own particular configuration of causes and effects extending back through their entire life, and, in a sense, through the entire history of everyone who shaped them. Their difficult behavior in this moment arises from conditions, and conditions by their very nature are subject to change. This does not mean you must tolerate harmful behavior indefinitely, and it does not mean you abandon appropriate boundaries or accountability. But it does mean that the rigid categories of permanent villain and permanent victim, categories the untrained mind reaches for so quickly in the heat of conflict, dissolve upon closer examination, replaced by a more accurate and ultimately more workable understanding of two interdependent streams of experience, each shaped by countless causes, each capable of genuine change given the right conditions. This understanding also transforms how we relate to our own difficult emotions within these relationships, particularly anger, which is perhaps the most common and most corrosive emotion arising within close human bonds. When anger arises, the untrained mind typically does one of two things: either suppressing the anger entirely, pretending it does not exist, allowing it to fester silently beneath a forced smile, or expressing the anger explosively, allowing it to dictate words and actions that often cause harm disproportionate to whatever triggered the reaction in the first place. The teaching we have explored tonight offers a third possibility: neither suppression nor explosive expression, but clear observation. When anger arises, you can, with practice, observe it as a temporary formation, arising from specific conditions, contact meeting an unpleasant feeling tone, that feeling tone giving rise to craving for the unpleasant situation to end, that craving giving rise to the particular contracted, heated quality we call anger. Observed clearly in this way, anger loses much of its compulsive power. You can feel its heat without being forced to act from it. You can acknowledge its message, perhaps that a genuine boundary has been crossed, perhaps that a genuine need is not being met, without allowing the emotion itself to dictate reactive words you will later regret. I want to offer you now a slightly deeper exploration of what happens in the body and mind when this kind of clear observation is cultivated consistently over time, because understanding the actual mechanism makes the practice considerably easier to sustain, especially during the inevitable periods when progress feels slow or when old habitual patterns reassert themselves with surprising strength. In the earliest stages of contemplative practice, most people notice that their attention is almost entirely captured by the content of experience, the story of what happened, the judgment about who is right and who is wrong, the anticipation of what should happen next. Attention rarely rests, in these early stages, on the bare, direct sensation of the present moment itself, the actual physical sensations in the body, the actual texture of the breath, the actual quality of sound entering the ears before the mind labels and interprets it. As practice deepens, something begins to shift. The mind develops what might be called a witnessing capacity, an ability to notice thought and emotion arising without being completely absorbed into their content. This witnessing capacity does not eliminate thought or emotion. It does not produce some artificial state of blankness or dissociation from ordinary human experience. Rather, it introduces a subtle quality of spaciousness around experience, a sense that thoughts and emotions are events occurring within a larger field of awareness, rather than being identical to the awareness itself. This is an extraordinarily important distinction because it is precisely this spaciousness that allows genuine choice to enter the picture. When you are completely identified with anger, fused with it entirely, there is no gap within which choice can occur, only the compulsive expression of the emotion itself. When you can observe anger arising within a spacious field of awareness, even a small degree of separation opens between the raw emotional energy and your response to it. And within that small gap, genuine freedom becomes possible. This is why contemplative traditions across many cultures have placed such enormous emphasis on sustained, regular meditation practice. Not because meditation itself is some magical technique that instantly transforms character, but because it is through the patient, repeated cultivation of this witnessing capacity that the gap between stimulus and response gradually widens, giving you more and more room to choose your actions from wisdom rather than from compulsive reactivity. This capacity develops slowly, often frustratingly slowly, and it is important to have realistic expectations about this timeline. You will not sit down to meditate once and suddenly find yourself permanently free from anger, from craving, from the illusion of separate selfhood. What you will find, if you practice patiently and consistently over months and years, is a gradual incremental widening of that gap. A slow but genuine transformation in your capacity to meet difficult experience with clarity, rather than being swept away by it entirely. Let me also address something that often troubles people encountering these teachings for the first time, particularly those who come from cultural or religious backgrounds that emphasize a strong, stable sense of personal identity as the foundation of psychological health. The teaching of non-self, properly understood, does not conflict with having a healthy, functional sense of personal identity in the conventional sense. You will still, after deep contemplative practice, know your own name, remember your own history, maintain your own preferences and relationships and responsibilities. The teaching of non-self operates at a different level of analysis, addressing not the conventional, functional sense of personal continuity that allows you to navigate daily life, but the deeper, often unconscious assumption of a fixed, permanent, independently existing identity underlying that conventional identity. You can function perfectly well in the world, maintaining all the conventional markers of a stable identity, while simultaneously holding that identity with a lighter touch, recognizing its constructed, ever-changing, interdependent nature, rather than clinging to it as some absolute, unchanging truth about who you fundamentally are. This lighter touch changes everything about how you move through difficulty. Consider how differently you respond to criticism when you hold your identity loosely compared to when you grip it tightly. If someone criticizes your work and you are gripping tightly to a fixed identity as a competent, capable person, that criticism feels like an attack on your very existence, threatening the solid self-image you have constructed and defended for years. But if you hold your identity more loosely, recognizing it as a constantly evolving interdependent process rather than a fixed monument to be defended at all costs, the same criticism can be received quite differently, perhaps as useful information about how to improve, perhaps as simply one person's perspective that does not require you to collapse into shame or explode into defensive anger. The circumstances remain identical. Your capacity to meet those circumstances with equanimity depends entirely on how tightly or how loosely you are gripping the construction of your own fixed identity. I want to speak now, before we move toward our closing reflections, about how all of this relates to the specific experience of aging. Since so many of you listening tonight are likely navigating the particular challenges that arise in the middle and later decades of life, challenges this teaching addresses with remarkable directness and compassion. Western culture in particular tends to treat aging as a kind of ongoing loss, a gradual diminishment of everything that once made life vibrant and meaningful: youth, physical capability, social relevance. And this framework, rooted once again in the illusion of a fixed self that should remain permanently unchanging, generates enormous unnecessary suffering as the years accumulate. But if you have genuinely absorbed the teaching of impermanence and non-self that we have explored together tonight, aging appears in an entirely different light, not as a tragic departure from some fixed, correct state of youthful vigor, but as the entirely natural, expected unfolding of a process that was never fixed or static in the first place. The body you have now is not less real, less valuable, or less worthy of care than the body you had at 20 years old. It is simply the current expression of the same ever-changing process that has been unfolding since your birth, a process that will continue changing regardless of how tightly you grip at any particular stage along its unfolding. This does not mean you should not care for your health, should not seek appropriate medical treatment, should not grieve genuine losses of capability or independence that sometimes accompany the aging process. It means that the suffering added on top of these natural changes, the suffering that comes from insisting that things should be other than they are, from comparing your current body unfavorably against some idealized past version of yourself, from believing that your worth as a person somehow diminishes alongside your physical capabilities. All of this additional suffering is not required by the aging process itself, but is generated by the mind's habitual insistence on permanence in the face of a reality that has never once offered permanence to anyone. There is a particular freedom available to those who genuinely absorb this teaching in the second half of life, a freedom that younger practitioners, still caught in the momentum of building careers and families and reputations, sometimes struggle to access as fully. As external achievements accumulate or fail to accumulate according to earlier ambitions, as relationships shift and sometimes end, as the body changes in ways beyond anyone's control, the person who has cultivated genuine understanding of impermanence and non-self finds that these changes, rather than representing pure loss, become opportunities for an ever-deepening recognition of what was never dependent on external circumstances in the first place. The awareness that has witnessed every stage of your life, from childhood through this very moment, remains as complete and as present now as it was decades ago, untouched by the rise and fall of achievement, relationship, and physical capability. This recognition, cultivated patiently through the practices we have discussed tonight, becomes an increasingly reliable source of peace, precisely during the years when external circumstances often become less reliable, less controllable, less able to provide the sense of security we once mistakenly expected them to deliver. As we move now toward our final reflections this evening, I want to offer one more practical teaching, something the tradition calls the practice of loving kindness, because everything we have discussed tonight regarding non-self, karma, dependent origination, and emptiness ultimately serves a single unified purpose: the reduction of unnecessary suffering and the cultivation of genuine well-being, both for yourself and for every being whose life intersects with your own. Loving kindness practice involves the deliberate, systematic cultivation of goodwill, beginning with yourself, extending gradually outward to loved ones, to neutral acquaintances, to difficult people, and eventually to all beings, without exception. This practice might seem, at first glance, disconnected from the more philosophically dense material we have covered tonight regarding the nature of self and reality. But in truth, it flows directly and naturally from everything we have discussed. If you genuinely understand that there is no fixed, separate self standing apart from the vast web of interdependent conditions that produced you, then the artificial boundary you have drawn between your own well-being and the well-being of others begins to seem less absolute, less defensible, less aligned with how things actually are. The suffering of another person is not, from this deeper perspective, entirely separate from your own suffering, because both arise from the same fundamental patterns of craving and clinging that we have explored together tonight, and both are equally deserving of the compassion that recognizes suffering wherever it appears, without the arbitrary boundary that says my suffering matters but yours does not, or your suffering matters but mine does not. Loving kindness practice is simply the direct, felt cultivation of this recognition, extended systematically until it becomes not merely an intellectual position, but a genuinely felt orientation toward every being you encounter. Before we close completely tonight, I want to guide you through a brief version of this practice, something you can return to whenever you need it, whether in moments of genuine distress or simply as a regular part of your ongoing contemplative life. Begin by bringing your attention back to your own breath, feeling it move naturally in and out of your body without any need to control or adjust it. Silently, in your own mind, offer yourself these simple phrases, allowing whatever genuine feeling arises alongside the words, without forcing or manufacturing any particular emotion. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be at ease. May I be free from suffering. Repeat these phrases slowly, allowing a few breaths to pass between each one, and notice whatever arises within you as you offer yourself this simple, direct wish for your own well-being, a wish you are perhaps unaccustomed to extending toward yourself with such directness and simplicity. Now bring to mind someone you love easily, someone whose happiness matters to you without complication or ambivalence, and silently offer them the same phrases. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be at ease. May you be free from suffering. Notice the warmth that naturally arises when extending this wish towards someone you love, and simply allow that warmth to be present, without needing to intensify or analyze it. When you feel ready, extend the same phrases towards someone more neutral in your life, perhaps a colleague you do not know particularly well, or a stranger you encountered recently, someone toward whom you feel neither strong affection nor strong aversion. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be at ease. May you be free from suffering. Notice how this practice, extended toward someone neutral, begins to reveal the artificial nature of the boundaries we typically draw between those we consider worthy of our care and those we consider irrelevant to it. If you feel genuinely ready, and there is no obligation to rush this stage of the practice, bring to mind someone with whom you currently experience difficulty or conflict, and see if you can extend, even in the smallest measure, the same basic wish for their well-being. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be at ease. May you be free from suffering. This does not require you to excuse harmful behavior, does not require reconciliation, does not require you to feel warm affection towards someone who has genuinely wronged you. It simply invites you to recognize that this person too is caught within the same fundamental patterns of craving and clinging that generate suffering for every unenlightened being, and that wishing for the reduction of their suffering is not the same as excusing their harmful actions, but is instead an act of freedom for your own heart, releasing you from the additional burden of carrying active ill will alongside whatever appropriate boundaries or consequences their behavior may warrant. Finally, expand this wish outward to include all beings everywhere, without exception. Every person you have ever known, and every person you will never meet. Every being currently suffering in ways you cannot even imagine, and every being currently experiencing genuine joy and ease. May all beings be safe. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be at ease. May all beings be free from suffering. Let this final expansion remind you of the truth we explored earlier tonight regarding interdependence, the recognition that you are not separate from this vast community of suffering, striving, occasionally joyful beings, but are yourself one temporary and beautiful expression of the same conditions that produced every other being sharing this brief moment of existence alongside you. This practice, offered regularly, gradually reshapes not only how you relate to others, but how you relate to your own suffering when it inevitably arises, because it cultivates a quality of unconditional goodwill that does not depend on circumstances being pleasant or unpleasant, does not depend on people behaving well or poorly, does not depend on your life unfolding according to your preferences. This unconditional goodwill becomes, over time, a stable ground beneath the constantly shifting weather of daily experience, a ground that does not require external validation to remain steady, a ground that has, in fact, been available to you this entire time, waiting patiently to be recognized and cultivated, exactly like the awareness we discussed earlier that has never once, across your entire life, gone missing even for a single moment.